Hi there. Welcome to the Luxury Meets podcast, a new kind of business podcast where we take you around the world to interview global leaders and get into their personal stories about chasing excellence across health, wellness, beauty, travel, sport, hospitality, culinary, beverage, retail, cannabis, design, and so much more. I'm your host, Jed Wexler, founder and CEO of LMCC. In this episode, I'll be talking to three pioneering journalists: Oset Babür-Winter, senior drinks editor at Food and Wine; Claire McCormack, senior editor, Beauty Independent, along with writer and cultural artist Chala June. You've seen Chala's work in Appétit, Condé Nast, Traveler, and many others. We'll be discussing what's really happening in food, wine, beauty, wellness, and culture. I'm so happy to present Episode 2, Luxury Meets, What's Now, What's Next, an Editor's Roundtable. Before we jump into our conversation today, I wanted to take a minute to thank our sponsor for today's episode, a very special wellness brand called Black Dahlia Botanicals. Black Dahlia Botanicals was one of LMCC's very first selected showcasing brands at our conference way back in 2019. The team, our attendees, and I sampled everything then and just loved it. They have incredible chef-crafted CBD chocolate bonbons, lollipops, and gelée, all made by hand in small batches in downtown LA. Their Alchemy collection of CBD-infused candles and fragrances also sells out everywhere as well. It's a perfect combination of ethically sourced CBD, groundbreaking science, and conscientious craftsmanship. It's an amazing, trusted company we are honored to support. And they've created a special promo just for our listeners. Visit blackdahlia.co to experience their handmade confection, CBD-infused candles, and fragrances. You'll receive 20% off when you visit blackdahlia.co and enter LMCC20 at checkout. You can also find the link in our show notes. Hi, welcome to the Luxury Meets podcast. I'm your host, Jed Wexler. I'm so excited that we have this very special editors roundtable with these pioneering journalists in and outside of cannabis, CBD, hemp, wellness, beauty, food, beverage, you name it. I'm going to allow these folks to introduce themselves. Claire, why don't you start?
Hi, Jed. Thanks for having me. I'm Claire McCormack. I'm a senior editor at Beauty Independent. We're a digital publication that covers all things beauty, wellness, personal care from and through an entrepreneurial lens.
Chala.
Hi, I'm Chala June. I am currently a contributing editor with Edible Manhattan, Hudson Valley, Brooklyn, and Westchester, covering food and creatives and makers in the New York City area. I'm also a full-time freelancer, and I've worked with Bon Appetit, Cherry Bomb Magazine, Imbibe, and others, covering all things food and fun.
Oset?
Hi, I'm Oset Babür-Winter. I'm the senior drinks editor at Food and Wine magazine. I primarily oversee our drinks coverage, so that's wine, spirits, cocktails, non-alcoholic drinks, you name it, but also contribute to food and lifestyle coverage that the magazine does.
Oh, thank you. So, as I was saying, your story, the through line here is, you're really pioneering journalists and in a way advocates for these previously niche and often misunderstood and oftentimes stigmatized categories, product categories that now have exploded into the consumer and retail mainstream worldwide. And I would say that you have had a big hand in that. You've brought your mainstream influence to this, you brought it back out into the world. And I really want to kick things off. What inspired you or drew you to cannabis, CBD, hemp-related wellness, and this vision to explore and amplify these overlaps with all these other industries and integrate it into your coverage and this blended consumer phenomenon? Claire, I'll let you kick us off with your thoughts on that.
For sure. Growing up in New York City and going out to clubs and raves, that whole culture of anything that's underground, stigmatized, counterculture, drugs, sex, drugs, rock and roll, I love it. I'm in on it. And so as I watched this come into the beauty and wellness world in a big way. And if you were writing about beauty around 2018, which I was, you couldn't, the CBD boom was undeniable. You couldn't really call yourself a journalist if you weren't writing about it. And as such, I did write a ton of stories about the movement, the trends, the brands, the leaders, watched it explode, watched it come down. But going back to the entrepreneurs in this space, really incredible people, amazing people. All entrepreneurs are super inspiring, but because of the extra hurdles that people building in cannabis, CBD, another area I love, which is sexual wellness, there's so many extra hurdles that they have to deal with. And it's a lot harder for them to get their stories out, to get their voices heard. And so any way I could in my little pocket of the world, amplify what they were creating, what they were doing, that was super important to me and made it super easy for me to be able to write about it and continue to.
And it's compelling for the business. And Chala, you have a very interesting story about your inspiration, about how, you brought culinary and cannabis together and kind of amplified that out. So if you could speak to your inspiration as well.
Absolutely. Kind of similarly to Claire, I have been, in the world of cannabis consumption for, over half my life now. But what has inspired me to bring cannabis into my journalism and cover it more intentionally, and especially at the intersection of cannabis and culinary, are the entrepreneurs, are the makers, the creators who are really creating culture shifting and perspective shifting work around cannabis that allows us to really view it in this new light that's not only destigmatized but celebrated. And so it was really seeing these chefs who have worked at Michelin star restaurants, who have been James Beard Award nominees or winners, enter into the cannabis space, and really seeing how they're using cannabis as a way to be able to be more creative, to be able to be more playful, and especially at a time where mainstream media and culture is starting to pay more attention to the toxicity of, restaurant and kitchen and chef culture. How are these chefs who are working with cannabis bringing joy and fun and playfulness back into food, bringing hospitality, being hospitable back into the environment of culinary, and using cannabis to do so is something that I think is really magical, to say the least.
Thank you. And Oset, this movement, this non-alcoholic beverage movement and infused beverage movement, from your vantage point with food and wine, how did you see this happening? And one of the most recent 2023, your Food and Wine Drink Innovator of the Year award was an infused beverage company called Can, who sold about 10 million plus cans. So I'm very intrigued to hear your kind of mainstream look, and your inspirations as well.
Yeah. People ask me somewhat frequently, what are you really excited about in drinks? And for me, the answer really is almost always the NA space, because of how inclusive it is. I think that, something that has been really interesting to me is to talk to founders in the non-alcoholic space, but also in the infused beverage space, about who their target consumer is. And it is a lot of folks who are choosing not to consume alcohol for, personal reasons, medical reasons, what have you, but it's also a lot of harm reduction and folks who are looking to just drink a bit less or, consume alcohol in a more thoughtful way. And so for me, I think it's really, the reason that I like to bring it into my coverage is because I think it really is pulling additional chairs up to the proverbial drinking table, the bar, if you will, because it just allows more folks to participate in those environments that are traditionally ones where you would need to order a drink. And so I just think that it's really, for me, it's just seeing how inclusive those drinks make that space that traditionally hasn't been. And also there's just a lot of room for creativity. It's really exciting to me.
And what you said about being inclusive, if we're talking about wellness, which we are talking about in a sense, this is really what you're doing in this category, in a sense, is transforming how people come together, the opportunities to socialize in person. And it can be a key component to wellness, personal wellness, community wellness. And, I just read a study in the pre-social media era, about 80% of people would see their friends in person once or twice a week. And now that's down to just below 30%. And, couple that with the COVID era, there is this real feeling and reality of disconnection, which has only been heightened. And we know now that healthy social connections are a pillar of wellness. So, Oset, going back to you about being inclusive, can you talk about the socializing piece, the more options available, being able to be with people and not drink and not have that stigma and those kinds of feelings? And then, I'll send it back to Claire and Chala.
Yeah, I think that, when I go to a restaurant and look at the cocktail list, the first thing that I do skip to oftentimes is and I will say, like, I drink, I absolutely do. But, I will skip to the NA section because for me, I think that if a restaurant is making the choice to invest just a little bit of energy to put together some like thoughtfully made NA options, that goes a long way with me because it shows that, you're not just sort of relegating those folks to drinking like a soda or like, sparkling water, but kind of like putting in a bit more effort to do that. I think it's actually also similar to when restaurants choose to make accommodations for folks with allergies, which my partner has several dietary restrictions. And so that's something that I engage with on a regular basis. I think it's really just making people feel welcome. And I think that in a lot of ways, infused beverages and non-alcoholic beverages do kind of, like I was saying, make it so that more people can participate in those environments that were historically not, that maybe you would feel uncomfortable at, or like people would ask you like why you weren't drinking. Like I do feel that there's this reclamation of the word drinking in general, of like what it means to drink. And I think that having these like thoughtfully created options, like yesterday I went to a tasting for French Bloom, which is one of my favorite NA players. It's a like very, very thoughtfully made non-alcoholic sparkling wine, done in like a champagne style. And that is like the whole reason that brand was created, was because the founders were realizing that they felt kind of left out in these social settings if they weren't drinking for one reason or another. And I think that there's like a lot of that kind of ethos motivating these brands, which is great.
And Claire, what's your take on it? Beauty, sexual wellness, skincare, or your own events at Beauty Independent, how are you seeing this coming together around this category and outside of it?
I want to go back to something Oset said about harm reduction, which is something I have had a bee in my bonnet about for a while now. I really see the wellness industry embracing harm reduction. It's something I've been writing about, and it goes to people coming together and gathering. Again, going back to days of partying, it was always the coolest thing to be like the most messed up person at the party. And the idea of harm reduction was like the least cool thing on earth to talk about. Like, how do we bring this down a notch, right? And the fact that so many brands in like the non-alc space, in the CBD, in the weed space, really across wellness in general, are looking at how can we come together and party and like have a blast and do it safely. And that to me is just so inspiring. It makes me so happy that it's being embraced on all levels. So I see people like Dirty Mag, I don't know, it's a New York City based magazine, and they're like very cool people. And like harm reduction is a major part of what they're doing and what they're creating. And again, like it being embraced by the cool kids warms my heart, makes me happy, and it makes getting together better and safer and fun, and not like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen tonight,
I also feel like it's great that these brands aren't, I think the ones that are successful aren't preachy. Like they're not like, oh, they're not pretending that this is like a holier than thou approach or like this is only for people who are sober. Like I think the fluidity is so key to this space. And I think to what Claire was saying, that feels really critical to me.
And when you say fluidity, can you go into that a little bit? Is it the seamless normalization of this and the other? And, can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, these products aren't being marketed for or marketed to or created for folks who are, not indulging in any kind of substances, whether that's alcohol or cannabis or what have you. It's for folks who kind of are looking to, I think, replace the fifth drink of the night with something else that feels like thoughtfully made, creative, cool, like Claire was saying, but, isn't like the only thing they're doing. And so I think like giving people the option to swap out like the sixth cocktail with something like that is kind of what I'm seeing more. And I think that's awesome because I do think it ends up translating to that harm reduction aspect.
And incorporating it into your life.
Yeah.
Chala, you put together, culinary events and you bring people together and you cover the community of food and culture. How do you see this coming together as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that piece of harm reduction is so important. And I think it's beautiful to see that become a part of the cultural zeitgeist and a part of the main cultural conversation, because especially considering just all of the loss that we've all seen and endured since the beginning of the pandemic, I think it only makes sense that culturally as a society, we're seeing these shifts towards really wanting to be intentional in how we come together and intentional in how we care for ourselves and one another. And so when I curate events, culinary events, it's really important to have that intention of how can we bring people not only to the table, but allow them to bring their full selves to the table. I think that that's a conversation that isn't fully thought when we're curating an event and we want it to look a certain way and we want everyone to bring a certain vibe, but people are going to show up as people. And that is something that's so unpredictable, but also so beautiful and allows you to create space to really make communal magic. And that's why I love bringing cannabis into the culinary events that I curate and into those experiences, because cannabis is something that also allows people to, open themselves up a little bit more, to bring their full selves to the table, to not necessarily be as anxious as opposed to a, alcohol centered event where I know personally, the more I drink, the more I'm in my head about, do I look sloppy? Is this person paying attention to how I'm moving through the space? And it's really great to be able to curate events centered around the food, really, but with cannabis as a complement so that people can really feel that comfort and be able to form these connections also with people who they might not have come to the event with. Or I know a lot of people who come to these events alone because they know that they're going to be able to meet other people, because the act of sharing cannabis is so inherently communal in that way as well, that drinking isn't necessarily in the same way. So it's really been so exciting to see how cannabis and food can really be married in this way that not only bring people to the table, but keep people at the table in a really intentional way.
And Chala, thank you for that. Going back to highlighting this accessibility, this mainstreamness. You did a cannabis event recently, a cannabis culinary event, where there was no cannabis in the food, which really did give people the choice. And part two is going from community connections to cultural connection. Maybe you can speak to that, your vision around that, because that feels like another layer deep into how cultures connect as well.
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of Black History Month, I had the immense honor and privilege of curating an event called Blessed and Highly Flavored, a culinary celebration of plants and roots. And my intention with the event was to celebrate the incredible culinary heritage of the African American community, but also celebrate the contributions and the heritage that we have behind the cannabis plant as well, and have that conversation all at one table instead of kind of in different pockets. And I intentionally didn't infuse any of the food because I wanted every single person there to decide what kind of experience they were going to have. And I find that I love going to an infused dinner. I am a total fan. I love it when there's weed in the food, but I know that for a lot of people, they get anxious about the dosage. They don't feel like they have as much control. They want to be able to really eat and enjoy the food, but they don't want to get way too stoned. And so what we did instead was I partnered with the Travel Agency, which is an incredible dispensary in New York. And they were able to connect me with Black-owned cannabis brands that they carry. So we were able to have brands be able to connect directly with people who were there. And also we had a bar by the infused drinks brand Brit, which is a Black woman-owned brand as well. So people were able to have infused drinks or non-infused drinks if they wanted to as well. So they could choose how they wanted to tailor their own experience. And it was beautiful to bring together this room of exclusively Black and African American people, because I don't think in my years of moving through the culinary and cannabis spaces that I've been in a room that had cannabis as an element that was so intentionally curated specifically for people of the Black experience. I've been to a couple, but it felt really special to be able to have it be there and to be so self-guided. Really speaking to people's autonomy and the autonomy that as Black people in this country, we often don't feel around consuming this plant because there's so much stigma, because there's so much negative history. And so to be able to create that environment intentionally for a room of predominantly queer Black people as well. As a queer trans person myself, it felt so important to bring my community there and create a space where they could bring their full, fabulous, colorful selves as well. And it speaks to really the power that not only food has, but that cannabis has to be a platform and a lens through which we can share our culture and see each other eye to eye in this way as well.
Thank you, Chala. I really appreciate that. Continuing this, global mainstream, we'll say healing phenomenon at, retail, big retailers are carrying this all across the world now. The food, wine, you have the Sephoras, you have the Ulta Beauties, you have the vitamin shops, you have CVS, you have all across the board, this unified retail phenomenon is taking place. And these folks, retailers and consumers, are looking for trusted products, trusted brands. And so what I wanted to ask each of you, and Oset, I'll start with you. This is our, trend snapshot. What is now? What are you seeing now? What is next? And really, what do you want to see? Is it products, brands? Is it education? Is it movements? And, what is pushing this forward, and what do you hope to see push forward? And Oset, we'll go back to you with this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, something that's been really exciting to see that I think is a shift from previous years is microdose versions of, especially in the culinary space, whether it's something you drink or eat specifically. I think that the emphasis for a lot of folks in years past, also kind of tying to what Claire was talking about, is like how messed up can I get? Like, what is the most stoned that this thing will make me? Like the 50 milligram Reese's cup situation, like that, that was the vibe. And I feel like now, to talk about Can, our drinks innovator from last year, the product that I fell in love with them is their Low Boy, which is just 2 milligrams of THC and I think 4 milligrams of CBD. It's a microdose, and they make a High Boy that is still just 5 milligrams. So it's still a pretty relatively low dose of cannabis. And similarly, I see there's another brand in the space nowadays that does a 2 milligram liqueur that I really love adding to non-alcoholic drinks because it again, like allows me to, I know exactly how much the ounce is. It's a micro dose that I can add to a non-alcoholic beverage. And then again, they make a 5 and I believe a 10 milligram version of that beverage as well. And so I think the flexibility and the option to, have this like low dose that is, there's like a market for that. It's not just like people looking for like the highest amount of cannabis for like bang for their buck. And they're priced that way as well. Like I think that shows that folks are kind of looking to integrate this into their lives in a more like natural way. Like you can have that 2 milligram can and like have a conversation with someone. I'm not going to say you can like go to work, but like find your own journey. That's great. But like, I don't know, walk your dog, go grocery shopping, do all those things and like integrate it into your life organically. That is something that I'm seeing more of that I really love because I think it just speaks to this kind of, it's meant to be more of a like addition to your life as opposed to like the focal thing, like not I'm stoned, but like, oh, this is just like part of what I'm doing right now. And I think that is something that I would love to see more players in the F&B space who are interested in infused drinks get into, as opposed to like the super high dose things that I feel like we saw maybe like a few years ago.
Thank you. Claire, from where you sit, what are you seeing? What do you hope to see?
I am seeing a lot of, and I hope to see more of, and this is also in beverages, products that include maybe psychoactive, but just mood enhancing benefits and ingredients. Love that. There's a big movement with Kanna, Kanna. I'm sure everyone here knows it. A brand just launched called Good Psyche. She's a really wonderful woman. And she has a face spray, which is just literal topical skincare, but it has like tremolo mushroom in it. And then she makes a mouth spray that has Kanna and a few other active ingredients in it. And again, it goes back to wanting to be out, wanting to socialize, wanting a buzz. I get social anxiety. I'm very introverted. So I want to go out and have that social lubricant that we usually turn to something like alcohol for. But okay, I don't want to get hungover and I don't want to not have my wits about me. And I love this movement across wellness and again, like beverage, that brands are bringing that aspect into products. And I think those products are wonderful. And I really do hope to see more of that. And many different formats, going back to what Chala was saying about like people being able to choose their own journey. So more ingredients, more formats, so anyone can find their wavelength.
I was going to say that made me think of another sort of aspect of all of this, which I feel like is maybe our responsibility as folks who write about the space. But I do think that I'm a little worried about the space being opened up to kind of folks greenwashing things or like saying like, oh, this, there's a lot of confusion around, I think, what some of these things do. And I think that like it relates to people being like, okay, well, what are terpenes and what is the difference between like this hybrid? Like, I think there's so much room for education around that as we see more of these like functional ingredients getting incorporated into the space, I feel like it opens up the door for, I'll say like bad actors to like take advantage and be like, oh yeah, this is going to do this. And then it doesn't do that for someone, or it actually you have a negative reaction, and then it sort of turns someone off from the space in general. So I feel like it's up to us as journalists to some extent to sort of be the folks who are actually testing these products and talking about like what they should do and how, and the actual actives. So sorry to jump in. That just made me think of like the opportunity for that.
No, that's a perfect segue into Chala, because we've talked about consumer education and scaling consumer education so it mirrors what the other categories do. So, if you can speak to that in a trend, hope to see context, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up just how these negative experiences can really turn people off. Because going back to what you were saying, Oset, about the microdosing of cannabinoids in these different formats, it's important because I don't know a single person who has had an edible who hasn't had that one bad experience where they've flown off into the stratosphere and wondered if they would ever come back down to earth. And for so many, like someone saw God. And I am constantly trying to encourage people and say, like, there are low dose, like, we live in the future. There are low dose products. You don't have to go that far. But for so many people, that one negative experience has completely turned them off from the category entirely. And so what I am hoping to continue to see are these products that are intentionally low dose, that are potentially blended with more functional ingredients. The brand I had mentioned, Brit, they're a drink mix brand that also uses functional ingredients, that has electrolytes in their drink mixes as well, because the founder, Brianna, is a food scientist. So she's actively like, how can we support the benefits that people are going to get from the cannabinoids and really build that out into the product? So that kind of intentionality is something that I love seeing in products in this space. And even building beyond that, thinking about the edible side of things, I personally would love to see more kind of fat-based, flavor-forward edibles. I don't eat candy, and most of the edibles on the market are candy. And there's a time and a place for that. People love gummies. Gummies sell. I'm not going to shame anyone for eating a gummy because it gets the job done. But I personally am someone who's really intentional about my processed sugar intake. I'm really intentional about my corn syrup intake. And so a lot of these gummies don't really do the trick for me. And also because cannabis is something that I consume as a health supplement, I don't want to also have to consume all of this processed sugar, which is something that I know is inflammatory for my body. And so looking at brands that are doing things that are more fat-based, more flavor-forward, like a Tempo cracker. I love the Tempo crackers because they have so many different flavor variations, and they use full butter fat infusions. So you get that kind of more stable effect of the THC as opposed to the sugar rush high and then that deep crash that some gummies can provide. And brands like Chef for Hire in New York that make the coconut oil and the olive oil and the honey so that people do have the agency to use these products in whatever format works for them, whether they make a whole olive oil cake or whether they just drizzle a little bit of honey into their morning tea, and they're able to really customize the experience that they're having in a format that's still very recognizable because they're everyday staples. So I would love to see, the infused, I think there are like infused srirachas and ketchups and things that are already out there. I know Kiva did an infused ketchup with Fat Burger, I think sometime last year, which I was so sad I wasn't in California to try that. But products like these that are really taking that innovation and pushing the CPG side of things forward, especially direct to consumer products in the food world are so big right now. Everyone's getting their chili crisp and their noodles and their things directly from a single source. How do we get that innovation and that intention about ingredients that a lot of these brands are bringing to food in general into the cannabis space as well? That's what I want to see more of.
Yeah, and connecting it to our mainstream global audience, Chala, what are you seeing this impact on the mainstream hospitality industry, especially in New York? What does that look like connecting out to that, when you read the tea leaves?
Yes, absolutely. I am so anxious about, but excited for the era of consumption lounges in New York. I think that should things run the way that a lot of the people I've spoken to want them to run, we could really see something incredibly exciting with this marriage of New York hospitality, which is some of the best hospitality in the world. We know that, we see that. And this incredible cannabis industry with some just like really beautiful flower that is being grown across New York State, in the Hudson Valley, in the Catskills, and being able to marry the two of those in something that is beautiful and experiential, I think could really see the industry go to new heights. I think about how I love even from going to my little cafe in my neighborhood to going to an Italian restaurant that I love. While the experiences are varied, you still get that level of New York hospitality where there's an understanding of how to curate the space, how to curate the environment, and give people an experience and a product that they're going to want to come back for. And I think that there is so much room to build cannabis into that and build out these really incredible experiences that people will travel from around the world to experience.
And all levels of hotels, restaurants, bars, and partners like that is a fascinating development. And, this is called the Luxury Meats podcast, but we don't think it means price point. We don't think it necessarily means expensive or exclusive. It's really what we're talking about is it's personal and intentional. So beginning a tradition on this podcast, I want to ask Claire first. How do you invite luxury into your life? What does that mean to you?
I suppose intentional solitude is a way that I do it. Starting my day, I do morning pages, I do my meditation with my red light because I am a wellness girly, and just letting my day start with that quietness, that being by myself. But again, intentionally. So I spend a lot of time alone. I work from home. It's me and my dog. My kids, when my kids come home from school, they're in the mix. But I spend a lot of time alone, but not all of that is actually reflecting and being present. So I think, oh my gosh, being present is the biggest luxury, because the more I meditate, the more I realize how not present I am in my life. I'm just going through whatever motion. So that feels like a huge luxury to me.
Thank you. That was lovely. And Oset, what does it look like for you?
I mean, I think it's not terribly dissimilar from what Claire's saying. I feel like I'm sure like all of you am never really just doing one thing, right? Like even if I'm like relaxing on the couch and like watching something, I'm scrolling on my phone or thinking about what I need to do, for dinner tonight, or, somehow everything becomes something related to work and I'll think about something for a story. And I think allowing myself the luxury of like not having my phone in my hand and not trying to do 3 other things while ostensibly just reading a book or a magazine or watching TV, that the luxury of that focus and presence is a big thing. But on a more like superficial level, I think it's not saving those luxury things for like quote unquote special occasions. Like I'm drinking my coffee out of like a fancy ass glass, and it makes me feel like better, than drinking it out of like a random mug that I've had since college. So things like that, like, yeah, lighting the nice diptyque candle, drinking your coffee out of a nice glass, choosing to open that bottle of sparkling wine or NA sparkling wine that, maybe I would have otherwise saved for something. And just deciding that like luxury, not to sound like corny or something, but luxury is sort of a personally defined experience. And it's just, yeah, I'm going to decide that these are things that I can incorporate into my day to day.
Thank you for that. And we'll close with Chala. How do you bring luxury into your life? What does that mean for you, Chala?
Yeah, to mirror what you've both been saying, it's definitely about that intentionality, being present, being really rooted in the moment. And I think what makes it luxury for me, or at least in my understanding, is that sense of feeling taken care of, feeling really deeply cared for. Even if it's me caring for myself and like drawing a bath and like lighting the incense and like taking a nice soak, that's something that makes me feel like, okay, yes, I did this to really care deeply for myself. But when I go to, a restaurant, a hotel, a spa, what have you, and the service is just excellent and they're really anticipating your needs and all of the details are paid attention to, and you really feel like no matter what you're going through, whether you're having like the best experience, the best day ever, or whether you come in there and you're like, I'm having a terrible day, please give me a gin martini and some French fries. But if the level of intention and care is there, like that always feels like a luxurious experience to me.
That is an absolutely perfect way to end this podcast, this very special Editors Roundtable. Thank you, Oset. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chala. And stay tuned for the next one. Thanks again. A big thank you once again to our guests for this episode, Oset Babür-Winter from Food and Wine, Claire McCormack from Beauty Independent, along with writer and cultural artist Chala June. I highly recommend you follow each of them on LinkedIn and, of course, all across social. And I also wanted to thank our sponsor for today's episode, Black Dahlia Botanicals. They've created a special promo just for our listeners. Visit blackdahlia.co to experience their handmade confections, CBD chocolate bonbons, lollipops and gelée, CBD infused candles, and fragrances. You'll receive 20% off when you visit blackdahlia.co and enter LMCC20 at checkout. You can also find the link in our show notes. Once again, that's blackdahlia.co. Enter LMCC20 at checkout. Thank you again, Black Dahlia Botanicals. And stay tuned for our next episode, Luxury Meets Retail, the kickoff to our Retail Leaders series with two incredible women at the forefront of health and wellness retail, one from one of your favorite national retail chains, and another with a luxury cannabis boutique now opening up amazing, beautiful stores all over New York City. This one is not to be missed. In the meantime, you can follow us at LMCC Show and visit lmccshow.com, and of course, subscribe, and you may even win a golden ticket to one of our award-winning events. See you next time.